the subsidies farmers depend on were linked not to how much land they rent or they own, but how much good they do, how much, in other words, their farming practices preserve wildlife, keep water supplies clean, reduce the emissions of climate change gases and enhance the welfare of their animals. That's the promise the Agriculture Secretary will make today as he outlines his ambitions for life outside the EU's Common Agricultural Policy. George Eustice, the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, joined us on the line from Westminster. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Let's begin with the principle, if we can, rather than the practice. Are you accepting the criticism that has been made by environmentalists for many years that modern farming practices have actually done an awful lot of harm?
Well, the evidence is quite clear that the intensification of agriculture that started in the mid to late 60s and in particular during the 70s has had a significant impact on wildlife. If you look at some of the farmland bird indexes, you've seen a significant drop, particularly during the 1970s when a lot of hedgerows were removed and where we saw an increasing reliance on pesticides. So yes, we want to take this opportunity to change direction, to make more space for nature within our farmed landscape again, and to reward farmers in a different way for farming sustainably rather than just doling money out based on how much land they own.
In a piece you've written for the Telegraph, you say something intriguing, that you want to go back to some of the practice that your grandfather, the Eustice family, been farming on the same patch of Cornwall for a very long time. You want to go back to some of the practices that he employed. Really?
Yes, what I actually said is we need a fusion of some of the agronomic practices that we've forgotten about, and so proper rotations. It used to be the case, for instance, that you would, if you had a field that had a particular problem with a perennial weed, well, then you would put pigs into that field to deal with it. And there are lots of other ways where you can use particular approaches to crop rotation to reduce the pressure from pests and diseases. But we need to dovetail that with the best technology, plant breeding technology and precision farming that we have today to give us the route forward.
You know what some farmers listening will be saying. He's been captured by the green lobby. We are only doing some of these things, they say, because we are under huge pressure from the consumer and also from supermarkets and governments to deliver good food at low prices. And that's why the hedgerows have gone. That's why we use chemical sprays. That's why we cram cows into very crowded conditions inside sheds. That's what the people of this country have demanded of us. Are you really saying that can be reversed?
Yes, I think it can be reversed. And, the point about the way we're changing policy is we're going to reward farmers for doing things differently, for farming in a more sustainable way. In some cases, that may be farming in a more extensive way. And indeed, in recent years, there's been a growing body of evidence that's shown, if you look at dairy farms, rather than pushing everything really hard and pumping concentrates into cows and trying to get maximum milk per cow, actually looking at the milk yield over the lifespan of a cow and pushing things less hard gives you fewer problems with lameness on cattle, fewer problems with diseases and mastitis and other such problems. So there's a lot to be said for supporting and incentivizing a switch to some of these more extensive systems that ensure farmers are still profitable, it will reduce their costs, and they'll have an income from the government for what they're doing to improve the environment, but also keep food prices stable.
What worries farmers, you'll know, and we heard from the National Farmers Union president earlier in the programme, is these are lovely principles, but they are that. There's an awful lot of detail not there. And yet we're now 4 years since the referendum. We are weeks from the end of the transition period. And farmers are saying, look, what you're telling us is that you will slash the direct payments that we currently get. We don't really know how much we're going to get instead.
Well, I think they do, actually. We set out very clearly in this paper. It's a 60-page document. There's sort of 30 pages setting out the journey and the approach we're going to take over the next 4 years in particular, but through the transition. And then there's a whole bundle of annexes which set out and describe the schemes we're going to put in place. And we're also very clear that the money that is saved from that reduction in those old area-based subsidies will be deployed on the new schemes. So the amount of money going into the farmed environment won't change, but the way we spend it and the things we try to incentivise through the way we spend it will.
Well, farmers have more immediate concerns, of course. They have the concern that if there is no trade deal, that in the words of your predecessor, Michael Gove, it will put up the price of lamb and sheep meat by 40%, and many farmers would be driven out of business within weeks. How likely is that?
I think that is unlikely. We've done a lot of work here looking at the impact of tariffs being applied on agricultural trade. The basic principle is that where we are a net exporter to the EU, and that's particularly the lamb sector, well, there would be some impacts. The price of lamb would rise in the EU, demand would go down, and there'd be a reduction in price in the UK as well. And so we will be looking at addressing that challenge in the short term and then helping farmers identify new markets. But on most other sectors...
But just to be clear, you're still having to prepare for the possibility of no deal. Despite all the rhetoric about, there could be a deal this week, you're still having to be ready for the fact that there could be big jumps in prices, big jumps in tariffs if this goes wrong in the next few days.
Well, we've always been ready for no further agreement. The Prime Ministers couldn't have been clearer throughout this that we will leave the European Union on Australia terms if that's what it takes. And the important thing to note in terms of most... deal. Well, in terms of most agricultural sectors, we are a net importer. And actually, if you were to put tariffs on beef from Ireland or dairy products from Denmark or fresh produce from France, then there would be new opportunities for British farmers.
You said the other day that Lurpak could come and make their butter here, and the only problem with that was Lurpak then came on the radio and television and said that's nonsense, we can't make our butter here.
Well, they've got a sensitive, I use that example quite deliberately, they have a sensitive trade union agreement which makes it difficult for them to move Lurpak production here, but not impossible. But of course, if they didn't, then it's open to them to lose market share instead.
Now, fishing seems to be at the heart of this, another of your responsibilities. The EU is saying Britain can get back around about 18% of the fishing rights in British waters. You are said to be asking for 80%. That's a vast gap.
Well, all we're actually asking for is the approach that Norway have, which is control of our own waters, our exclusive economic zone. That's out to 200